Welcome to Storm the Gates, Book 3 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera, Part 2. Chapter 5, Not a Pleasure Cruise. Hello, boat. I'm coming aboard. Daniel waved as the dragon stomped up to the four-masted vessel that had a square rear section full of souls staring and pointing at her. They probably said all kinds of complimentary things, but she couldn't hear anything over the petulant dragon's loud splashing. No one could give her permission to come aboard, but that was a small matter she could clear up when she found the captain somewhere on that rather large ship.
Here's the boat you wanted to catch. Now get off me before I can find out if angels really do taste like chicken.
The dragon stopped next to the boat and glared at her. As the dragon licked her lips, I've heard humans make chicken taste like all kinds of things, so you could probably make it taste like me, but not today. Thanks for ferrying me. Daniel saluted the dragon, then jumped across the gap. Since it was only about 6 feet wide, she didn't bother to spread her wings. Look out below. Souls scattered as she plummeted toward them. Danielle landed on the deck as the dragon harumphed loudly, then rolled her eyes and dove back into the sea, sending a wave to crash into the boat's side and rock it so hard it nearly capsized.
Whoa, what was that about?
Asked the captain of the boat as he fought to keep the boat from tipping over.
Someone's not having a good day,
said another dragon as she grabbed the side part of the ship and righted it. I suppose that's my fault. I broke the rules. Danielle strode through the gap her fall created before the souls on this deck could approach her. She didn't have time for questions right now.
You rebel,
the captain said. He stood on a raised deck up a flight of stairs from the main deck. With his back to her and the wind pulling at his robes, he could be any black angel. Her friend wasn't the only one to sport the gold band at the hem and cuffs of his white robe that every archangel wore. This muscular captain could be another angel. After all, angels came in a variety of different skin colors, and lots of angels liked the clean-shaven aesthetic so much they went bald. But then the captain shook his head and laughed, and Nathaniel froze mid-step. I know that belly laugh and that deep, resonant voice. Her shoulders sagged and her steps dragged as she mounted the stairs toward her doom. Why did I have to run into him now?
Why did you break the rules? Come up here and tell me what you've been up to lately. I bet you've got a great story to tell and I could use some entertainment.
Azariah glanced back at her with amused, glowing violet eyes. I'm in trouble now. How do I tell him an angel we both thought was lost thousands of years ago not only still exists, but he's on the other side of the sea fighting the adversary? You owe me big time, Arginil. Daniel trudged up the steps like a condemned prisoner. I didn't sign up for this.
What's wrong? It's not like you to drag your feet.
Azariah let go of the wheel. Do you need to steer this thing? And what's with the masts? Why don't they have sails? Daniel turned so she could sweep her hands across the deck and the objects in question. It also bought her a few minutes to compose herself.
They have sails, but they're furled right now because we don't need them. So that's why you don't see them since the dragon is pulling us. But I can cut down on the resistance if the rudder is aligned with the direction the dragon is going. So yes, I do steer.
Azariah turned the wheel to make his point. I didn't know. Since you're engaged in such important work, I'd better go hang with the passengers so I don't distract you. Daniel spun on her heel and started down the stairs until he caught her arm and stopped her.
Hey, wait a minute. Did I do something to upset you? Because you're acting weird and it's not like you. So fess up. Tell me what's the matter.
He squeezed her arm. No, you didn't do anything wrong. I've just got a lot on my mind. Daniel wondered if she could break his grip. They were both warrior angels, but way back when they were created, most angels were classified as warrior angels. A lucky few were classified as heralds, and then there were the choirs. Anyone who wasn't chosen to be a herald or to sing in the choirs of angels became a warrior angel because there weren't any other options. That created problems for angels like Arginil, who didn't fit either of those classifications. Thankfully, there was now a wide range of paths an angel could pursue, but many appeared after a terrible war in heaven and a mage war on earth that almost turned the place into a lifeless cinder.
So tell me about it. I'm just standing here steering a boat. I can do that and listen to you at the same time.
Azariah let go of her and turned the wheel again. His good humor pulled her thoughts away from the past. Are you that bored? Daniel stepped back up onto the short deck he stood on. It probably had some kind of nautical name and she could ask him for it, but that would just stall things even more. I might as well tell him. He'll find out anyway, and this sort of news is better from a friend. Daniel leaned against the short wall surrounding this deck and stared out past the pointy end of the boat, at the purple and blue scales of the dragon paddling along like a happy dog. Most of that dragon was underwater, but he kept his pointy ears above the waterline. All the better to overhear their conversation. Dragons were too curious for their own good. Since she already told one dragon what was going on, one, she might as well tell another one in case the worst happened and the biggest loser in history paid a visit.
I might be. So where have you been? What have you been doing? Tell me everything and don't leave out a single detail.
Azariah glanced at her the way her commander used to when he waited for a report. Where do I start? Because just thinking about the whole thing that she got involved with gave her a headache. But she could use the practice since she needed to figure out something to tell the other angels soon. The shores of heaven would appear on the horizon soon, and she needed to get her story straight before then.
You should start in the usual place at the beginning. Otherwise, I'll have trouble following the story.
He grinned like that was the punchline to a joke, but if it was, she never heard it before. Okay, here goes nothing. Daniel told him about overhearing Azrael boasting about a recent trip to hell and the strange girl she ran into in the gray between when the council sent her there to check out some strange things happening there. What did that girl say? At the time, she dismissed her story as a hallucination because lots of things could cause a mortal to do that, but now she wondered if that girl and the adversary's plot were somehow linked. Anything was possible with that creep. While she wondered that, she lost track of what she was saying until he grasped both her arms and shook her.
He still exists.
Azariah stared at her like he could read the truth from her memories, but she didn't think he had that kind of power. Ez wasn't a mage, but Argeniel was. Yes, he still exists, but he's got this martyr complex, so I don't know how long he'll continue to exist if I don't get help to him, and fast. Thaniel tried to recall if Argeniel was like that way back when he still lived in heaven. He was a little pessimistic, but not everyone could be sunny all the time.
Then let's go help him. Where is he?
Azariah gripped the wheel as the dragon raised his head above the waterline, confirming he heard every word. Argeniel was in the gray between when I last saw him. He planned to stop the adversary, and I don't think he intended to survive that conflict. But he wasn't alone. A mutual friend, someone you don't know, was with him, and I trust them to keep him from doing anything that might destroy him. Thaniel crossed her fingers. It was a habit she picked up from mortals, but it was comforting to think that a gesture could somehow bring her friend some luck. Azariah let go and spun the wheel hard toward whatever one called the side of a ship she wasn't standing on. The ship leaned hard enough in that direction that Thaniel almost collided with the wheel. What are you doing? She gripped the barrier thing between her and the sea far below, even though a fall wouldn't hurt her. It would just wet her wings. But she didn't want to deal with yards of wet feathers right now, not when they were on the boundary between the realm of the gray between and the realm of heaven. Matter and spirit interacted oddly here, so who knew what that water would do to her if she fell in? No, it would be better if she remained on the ship until they passed through that boundary.
We have to go back. I didn't save him then, but I'm not failing him now. Turn the ship. We're going back.
Azariah tried to turn the wheel, and something groaned as he stuck something between the spokes to prevent the wheel from turning back in the other direction. To be fair, I didn't know he needed saving back then either. I thought he went off to brood. What are you doing? Daniel followed him as he descended the steps to the main deck.
What does it look like I'm doing? I'm turning the ship around.
Azariah hurried to a rotating thing in the middle of the deck that had rods sticking out of its central axle. Ez grabbed a rod and pushed it to turn the axle, and a splash sounded as something plunged into the sea. What did you do? Daniel stood nearby, unsure of what to do since she knew nothing about boats.
I'm turning the ship. Look, it's turning.
Azariah grunted as he pushed the rod and turned the axle some more.
You can't do that. You need to take these souls to heaven. Then we can go back,
said the dragon, straining to stop the ship from turning so it could pull the ship forward. Argeniel is pretty tough. He never had a warrior's spirit, but he had the same training as us since he was in our class, so he knows how to throw a punch and how to dodge one. Plus, he's got powerful magic, and he's damned good at wielding it. Argeniel will be fine for a little while. Daniel hoped that was true as she glanced overboard and regretted it. The water around the boat shimmered like it was deciding if it still existed, and the boat shuddered like it was thinking about not existing too, but that would be bad for them if it made the wrong decision. A weird area separated the two realms, but that boundary usually wasn't visible during the few seconds it took to cross it. Unfortunately, it became more visible the longer they floated here, stuck between the two realms. The boundary was no place to tarry, as the loud creaks and pops coming from somewhere below attested. We can't stay here. Let's go to heaven. We're closer to its shore than to Argeniel, and now you're just wasting time we could use to get to him. Daniel grabbed a rod thing and pushed in the opposite direction, but that just stymied him. She couldn't push hard enough in this quasi-spirit form to overpower him, but he had the same problem.
What in the name name of heaven are you doing?
Azrael asked at the top of his lungs as he plummeted onto the deck. He did that thing where he crossed his arms and hovered over them, so his hair and robes dramatically billowed in the non-existent breeze. Maybe the wind was still deciding whether it wanted to affect the rest of the ship or just spend all its energy on making Azrael look impressive. In case that wasn't enough, he dialed up the illumination on his glowing violet eyes and the halo floating over his head and the blinding white aura surrounding him, as if they needed any more light right now. Azrael loved to make an entrance. Could you tone down your body glow to a less blinding level? Daniel let go of the rod so she could shade her eyes.
Fine.
Azrael sighed like it was such an inconvenience, and his aura faded as his gold sandals touched the deck. But he must have just shined them because they reflected the glow of his eyes and his halo. During the light show, he must have put his wings away because they were nowhere in sight.
Now, will someone please tell me what's going on here and make it snappy? I've got things to do.
Azrael snapped his fingers a few times in case once wasn't enough.
Someone's impatient,
Azariah said. But Azrael's arrival distracted him, so he stopped turning the vertical axle in the middle of the deck. That was probably the Archangel's plan all along, since the Council frowned on fighting within the ranks of angels.
You would be too if you had a dragon fly over and complain to you about someone I thought was my friend.
Azrael glared at Thaniel like she did something to offend him, when it was the dragon she offended. I didn't know she'd go complain to you, so you can't blame me for that. Thaniel raised her hands to show she was innocent. Since when were you the Department of Complaints? That seemed like an odd fit for someone like him. But Thaniel didn't understand most of the decisions the Council of Angels made, so why would this one be any different?
Look, we can sort out Daniel's dragon problems later. Right now we need to go back to the Grey Between. Arjaniel's in trouble.
Azariah turned the vertical axle thing the other way, and it sounded like it winched up something metallic, like a chain. Did he drop the anchor before? Was he now pulling it back up? Why did he drop the anchor? That seemed like an odd choice, but what did she know about sailing? Maybe that rudder thing he mentioned earlier needed help? Thaniel couldn't figure out how an anchor could help in that situation, but she was just a passenger on a shaking boat. Is the boat supposed to shake like that? Thaniel asked as the deck shivered, and it didn't do that because Azariah strode right up to Azrael and got in his face.
And you can go back there after you bring these souls to heaven. You know the rules.
Azrael jabbed his index finger into Azariah's chest, pushing the younger angel back a step. Then he turned so his robes could flare out dramatically behind him, while he waved to the souls staring at them from the stairs leading below decks and the rear part of this deck. Lovely they had an audience for this. Thaniel suppressed a groan. She didn't want another mark against her, but that was inevitable now, since every soul on the ship had a guardian angel watching over them, and those angels watched from the back of the crowd, since they were taller than all the souls aboard. Unfortunately, none were from her generation of angels, so she didn't know any of them. Darn it. At this rate, the Council will order me to guard a haven for a few hundred years or do some other boring task far away from them. Danielle would have sighed, but she needed to sort this out in a way that left her audience with a favorable impression of her if she wanted to have any hope of ever doing anything interesting ever again.
But this is Arjaniel. I haven't seen him in thousands of years.
Azariah ran a hand over his smooth scalp.
And you can wait a little longer. He won't expire.
Azrael planted his fists on his hips and adopted a stern look on his chiseled face. That's not true. He could actually expire if the Adversary takes his time crystal again and we don't find one to replace it with. Daniel studied the vertical axle. How far did one need to turn it to raise the anchor? I supposed I should turn it until it doesn't turn anymore. She grasped the rod still sticking out of the holes in the top of the thing and pushed it until the axle refused to turn.
What are you talking about? There's no such thing as a time crystal. They're just a rumor.
Azrael tapped her shoulder with his index finger.
Hey, I'm talking to you. Stop ignoring me.
Sorry to disappoint you, but they're not a rumor. I saw one with my own 2 eyes. Daniel let go of the rod and pointed at her glowing eyes. This arguing was getting them nowhere. She caught the dragon's eye and motioned for him to just pull the damn ship to heaven already so they could go back to the Grey Between. Arjaniel could wait a little longer so some deserving souls and their tired guardian angels could reach their final destination. I'm counting on you, Natalie, to keep him from doing anything too crazy. He knows he can't take on the Adversary on his own. He must wait until I return with help. The dragon got the message, and the ship lurched forward as cracks formed on the deck. The instant they passed the boundary line, the cracks closed, and the ship stopped groaning like it wanted to break apart. Danielle let her shoulders sag in relief. That was one disaster successfully avoided, and I didn't need to find out what happens to an angel who falls through the boundary line.
The adversary is in hell, and so is Arginil, so what's the hurry?
Azrael folded his arms and glowered at her like she did something to cause this. Actually, they're both in the gray between, and an army of demons and fallen angels are there too. Danielle strode over to the stairs leading to the half deck with the wheel, and sat on the third step from the bottom. Azrael followed her.
That's not possible. You'd better explain how that happened.
How can you say he'll be fine against an army?
Azariah followed Az, and he looked about as happy about the news as Azrael did. I beg to differ. I went to hell to check out his story. Thaniel paused so she could gesture with both hands to Azrael. I found Arginil and teamed up with him. Since then, I lost count of how many armies we encountered, but we walked away from them all.
See? I told you he'll be fine.
Azrael nudged Azariah with his elbow, and the captain wisely stepped away to put some distance between them. This next part would shock Azariah, but there was no help for that because she needed to see Azrael's reaction. There's something you should know. Arginil didn't fall. No one sent him to hell. He's not fallen. He's just like us, but more magical. Daniel stared right at Azrael, but his eyes didn't widen with surprise. He just nodded like that was his assessment too. Danielle shot to her feet as Azariah stammered in shock. She got right in Ez's face and jabbed her index finger into his chest with every accusation. But they were close to heaven now, so neither of them was corporeal enough to feel anything. You knew, and you left him there. Why did you leave that awful glamour in place? You could have broken it and told him he wasn't fallen, but you didn't. So I had to do it. Why didn't you tell him?
He wasn't ready to hear it, so I planted a seed of doubt. Oh, don't look at me like that. I planned to go back and break it to him slowly. I just didn't get the time to.
Azrael half turned to include their audience in the conversation. Daniel glanced past the pointy front end of the boat at the pearly gates, drawing nearer every moment. Good. They were almost there. She slipped past Azrael and tried to hug Azariah, but the incorporeal thing allowed him to walk through her, and that was not a pleasant sensation, because the light inside of them clashed because their natures were more similar than they were different.
Sorry about that.
Azariah rubbed the bridge of his nose as he stumbled from the shock of occupying the same space as her, but Daniel reeled too, so she just waved that apology away. Do me a favor and never do that again. You're just as fiery inside as I am, and I think I just got burned in places I didn't know I could burn. That was the downside to being made of spirit and light, but the gates were so close, Daniel could stand on the forwardmost tip of the boat and touch them. Since she could feel the sandals on her feet a little, she was now mostly incorporeal, but a small part of her was corporeal enough to avoid such intimate collisions, and that was a relief. The dragon pulling the boat rose out of the sea, revealing the harness and the thick ropes attached to it that connected it to the ship. Without a glance at anyone, the dragon swung the 3-story tall gates open, and he sprinted for the curving beach in front of them. He probably wanted to get away from them, and she didn't blame him one bit. The passengers looked eager to disembark too, so it shouldn't take long to get them offloaded. Their angels would lead them to their next destination anyway, so there was no need to hang about. Sorry for the delay, Arginil, but you know how obsessed our fellow angels are with the rules. I'll be on the way back to you soon.
Chapter 6. Tugging on Timelines. Morgana didn't slow as the shimmering gold dome over the library grew closer. Maybe she planned to run through it. She was an ex-god, so maybe she could cut through the shield like it was nothing more than a pretty glow surrounding the library. Or perhaps not, because she skidded to a halt a pace away from the shield and extended both hands until they touched it. But neither hand could penetrate the barrier.
Can you do something about this shield?
Morgana kicked it, but it didn't budge. No, I can just stare at it and wish it wasn't there. Ivarian kicked a rock and sent it flying into the shield, but it bounced off. Too bad Ran isn't here. He could just wish the shield away and it would disappear. But Ran wasn't here. Ivarian touched the shield and it didn't electrocute him. In fact, it didn't seem to do anything except block access to the library towering over them.
Well, what can you do?
Morgana leaned against the shield and studied him. I can do a little wind magic, but not enough to make a dent in that shield. Ivarian leaned against the shield too. It made a good backrest, weirdly enough.
Can you do anything else?
Morgana turned her head to keep him in view. I can go backward in time, but I don't think that particular gift is useful right now. Can you do anything with your magic? Ivarian stared at the glowing orange sky, but there was no sun, just a constant glow that blanketed the sky. It was strange. He'd always thought hell was a place of eternal darkness. A black speck appeared amid that vast expanse of luminous orange, but he probably imagined that.
Nothing that could help us get through this shield.
She pounded on it with her fist as that that speck in the sky grew until it looked like a man tumbling end over end. Did he go through that smoky door in the gray between two? Ivarian stepped away from the shield as the falling man sprouted large black bat wings and arrested his fall. Who or what is that? He pointed at the man gliding toward them.
That's trouble, and we'd better get inside the shield before it arrives.
Morgana pushed off the shield and spun to face it as she tapped her lower lip in thought.
No shield can stand forever, right?
I don't know much about shields. Why do you ask? Before she could answer, Ivarian realized where she was going with that question. You think there was a time before this shield existed?
Exactly. If we could go to that place in time, we could enter the library, and we'd get away from here before the adversary lands. Trust me, you don't want to be within a mile of him when he does.
Who or what is the adversary? Ivarian heard the term before, but the way she said it, the word had layers of meaning. What did she know about him?
He started out as a rebel angel with a cause, but somewhere along the way he changed and became a nightmare. Maybe his power twisted him. Maybe it was this place. I just know he became the enemy of everything and everyone, but we don't have time to discuss his origins or his transformation into the biggest and baddest villain of all time right now.
Morgana tapped on the shield again.
Can you take us back to before the shield existed?
Could he? That was the question, but what was the answer? Ivarian didn't use his time magic much before meeting Rosalie, and when he used it, he just went to the Arrow of Time. Does that place even exist anymore? Maybe I should check if I can reach it from here. Since they had no better options, Ivarian squared his shoulders, but just thinking of the Arrow of Time punched a hole through his heart because he learned of it from his mother, and she was now dying all because of him. And time was also messed up for the same reason. What if I don't need to go to the Arrow of Time? What if I could manipulate it from right here? After all, when his mother died, the past died too, unless Morgana or her sisters or her mother can do something to help her. It was a slim hope, but he clung to it anyway. Right now, time was broken, so he didn't need to be careful. Ivarian remembered the currents of time he sensed in that place of ruins after his uncle delivered an ultimatum. They brushed against his fingers like cold feathers, and he grasped them. Maybe I can use them to find the timeline here. It might not be the same one that governs the mortal realm, but that might be a good thing. Stay close to me, Ivarian said to Morgana, even though that should be obvious. Morgana stepped so close, the top of her head brushed the underside of his nose, and her nose pressed into his chest as she put her stiff arms around him.
Is this close enough?
She asked into his chest as the rest of her pressed against him. That might be too close. Ivarian tried not to fidget as she stepped back and put some space between them.
Is this better?
Morgana looked up at him. Yeah, just stand there and don't move. Ivarian pulled on the currents of time and hoped that would bring the timeline for this place close enough to grab. That was where his brilliant plan ended because he didn't know if he could move along that timeline. It wasn't the one he was born into. Maybe he shouldn't think about that right now. The currents were invisible, so he couldn't see how they flowed. At home, they flowed in curving lines from east to west, right through anything in their path. But this wasn't his home. He yanked first the right side, then the left, and the shield flickered on the left side. So that was the past in this world? Ivarian let go of the right side of the current and hoped he held part of this place's timeline. He pulled only on the left side of the current like it was an invisible rope. Cold chilled his hands as the current ended, and he grasped the timeline generating it. A rope made of ice appeared in his hands that had no beginning or end. It faded to invisibility 6 feet away from him, and time rewound as he tugged the past toward him. His breath misted as the temperature dropped. Morgana froze, and ice crystals formed on her long lashes. She's a goddess or something very like one. She'll be fine. Ivarian pulled harder, and the shield flickered until pieces vanished. Silhouettes raced out of the library and picked up pages. Each one had a single symbol scrawled in lavender ink. Then the silhouette raced back into the library, probably to return the paper to whoever drew the symbol. I need to go back further. Ivarian yanked the timeline until the shield vanished and no one else entered or left the library. It's now or never. Ivarian stepped back, but Morgana remained where she was. Damn it, she was still frozen. Well, the timeline was a freezing rope here, not an inflexible arrow made of ice, so he wrapped it around them until he could hold it with one hand. Then he took one hand off the timeline and dragged Morgana across the space where the shield was. Once she was across, he let go, and the icy rope slid away from them as time fast-forwarded to the present moment. Ivarian pulled her away from the blur of the demon running back and forth into the library to get the glyphs that created the shield and dropped them in a ring around the structure towering over them. The demon didn't see them because they stood outside time, and so they weren't part of his timeline until the realm's timeline slid back to the present and disappeared like it was never visible at all.
Well, that wasn't what I expected.
Morgana backed away and ran her hands down her dress, even though it wasn't wrinkled and not a single dark hair was out of place. Me either. Shall we go inside? Ivarian waved to the library. It looked even more like a fortress from up close since there were no windows, but it had a door that was probably barred from the inside. Should we knock?
No, I've got a better idea.
Morgana caught his hand and Hell vanished into a bright light. Of course, she could teleport just like his uncle. When the light faded, they stood in a dim chamber with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books. More books stood on the shelving units, separated by narrow aisles that wound through the space. Why didn't you flash us past that shield? Ivarian jerked his thumb at the wall behind him.
Because I can't do that. I'm not powerful enough to teleport through someone else's magic, and that includes shields. Come on, let's find that crystal before someone notices we snuck in.
Morgana spun on her heel and stalked toward the first aisle. Why didn't you teleport us from the gray between to Hell? Ivarian ran after her and reached for her arm, but she snatched it away and glared at him as she walked backward.
Because I can't teleport through things like that. Look, the most powerful X-gods were the first ones. I'm not one of them. I'm like you, third generation. But unlike you, both my parents are X-gods, and I'm lucky I can teleport at all. So shut up and follow me. I can feel the spells on that crystal. It's close.
Morgana spun around and marched down the aisle like a woman on a mission, because that's what she was. A woman determined to find the crystal that trapped her mother so she could free her, and he respected that. So Ivarian did as she asked, and shut his mouth as he followed her through a dizzying maze of shelves and books. Voices spoke from somewhere, but Ivarian couldn't tell from where until Morgana turned back and pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for silence. When she ducked behind a shelving unit, he copied her, and just in time, too. Two creatures who might be demons passed by on the other side of their hiding spot.
"Do you think he'll return? I wouldn't blame him if he didn't,"
said a demon with a husky voice.
"He'll return because the library is his home,"
said a demon with a high, sweet voice meant for singing.
"You sound sure of that,"
said the first one as his voice faded. If the second demon replied, Ivarian didn't hear it because they passed out of earshot. Morgana shrugged when he looked a question at her.
I don't know who they were talking about. Let's hurry so we don't find out.
She rose and peered over the shelving unit. When she motioned for him to rise, Ivarian pressed onward. The aisles twisted and turned like the walls of a labyrinth, but Morgana either didn't notice or she didn't care, because she never hesitated at an intersection. She hurried on as if she were an arrow flying straight toward a target. Maybe she was. She never explained what her powers were. Morgana stopped in front of a bookcase that looked like every other one.
This is it. The crystal is behind this thing. Help me move it.
She grasped one end and heaved until her face reddened. Ivarian grabbed the other side, but it didn't budge. Are you sure it's behind it? It feels like it's bolted to the wall.
It can't be. There must be a way to move it.
Morgana grabbed books from the shelves and threw them on the floor behind her.
None of these books must trigger a mechanism to move it aside. We just need to find it. Help me look.
You're making a mess. Shouldn't we avoid that so no one knows we were here? Ivarian picked up 3 books and shoved them back on the shelves.
I don't care if they know.
Morgana reached for another book, but a grating sound made her stop and step back as the bookcase slid aside, revealing a doorway.
Come on, it's in here.
Morgana rushed through the doorway before he could stop her. Ivarian followed her into the darkness, and she cursed.
Do you have a light?
I might. Ivarian slid both hands into his pockets to check. He should have something since Lumir crystals were ubiquitous in Shayari, and Ran wandered around with his pockets full of them.
Never mind.
Morgana held up a star-shaped crystal, and its glow lit her smiling face.
We did it. We found the soul trap.
Morgana hugged the crystal to her chest like it was a child she must protect at all costs. How do we get out of here? Ivarian waited for her to come to him, since he couldn't see much with her arms blocking most of the crystal's light.
I can flash us outside, but I can't teleport us through the shield. Can you repeat what you did before?
Morgana climbed over a long, thin rock with symbols carved on it. When she reached him, the dark chamber vanished in a bright flash. The light faded, leaving them in the rocky area outside the library, just steps from the shield. But Morgana didn't step back. She stayed by his side.
Now you do your thing.
Then what? Where do we go from here? Ivarian felt around for the currents of time to help him locate the timeline again.
We go back to the gray between, and then wherever you want. I promise we'd help you get vengeance, and we will, as soon as you free my mother.
Morgana hugged the crystal like she was hugging her mother. I guess that's as good a plan as any. And just maybe, with Morgana and her 6 sisters' help, he could fix what he broke and salvage something for Rosalie. She would want me to do that. So would Mom. With tears burning in his eyes, he traced the currents to the timeline. It was time to reverse time so they could get past the shield.
Chapter 7. You're back again.
Did it work?
The angel with an attitude asked, but she looked at Rosalie with worried, glowing violet eyes and cradled her. I think so. Rand forgave her impatience since he felt it too. I used to get scared when Papa or Uncle Mirren was sick or hurt. In fact, he still didn't react well to that, even though he was grown up now. But that ugly wound in her chest looked smaller. He already wished it would close up faster, so he refrained from wishing that again because a second wish for the same thing didn't always help. Sometimes the second wish canceled out the first one, and he didn't have unlimited energy to spend on this. Who knew what Rosalie would want him to do when she finally woke up?
While we wait, why don't you tell us who you are and how you know Rosalie?
Uncle Mirren rubbed his knee. It must hurt. Rand didn't wish it didn't hurt because he did that once and his uncle overdid it because he didn't feel the pain warning him to slow down. Then he was in even more pain. That was a tough lesson to learn, but Rand wouldn't repeat that mistake anytime soon.
I'm a friend of your friend, and that's all you need to know.
The angel rocked back and forth and her lips moved like she was praying, but no sound came out.
What about you? How do you all know Rosalie?
Mirren glanced at the ex-gods.
It's a long story,
Faye said as she hugged her fading sister. A light appeared in his peripheral vision, and Rand rose to investigate it since no one wanted to talk to him. The light grew until a glowing doorway appeared 6 feet away from the ex-gods and Rosalie. Not this again. Rand pulled another rock from his pocket.
I hate those things.
Faye pointed at the portal, and a fireball shot toward it. Wait, we don't know if the demons are friendly. We should find out before we throw fire at them. Rand held his palm out in a stop gesture, even though he probably couldn't stop an angry goddess, and he didn't want to try. That sort of intervention could lead to an early grave.
I'll save you the trouble of checking. They're not friendly. Destroy anything that comes out of that portal on sight if you want to have a future that's not overrun by demons.
Faye cupped her hand, and another fireball formed. Did she have a never-ending supply of them? I hope you never get that mad at me. Rand dodged the fireball she lobbed at the portal.
Our corner of the world is already overrun by demons.
Uncle Mirren rose stiffly, probably from sitting on the cold ground. We don't know if it's that way everywhere. They might just have come to our mountain. We attract weird things. Rand hoped they weren't everywhere. But he didn't have a way to find out unless he wanted to wish himself all over the country. But that just sounded wasteful, and he wasn't even sure if he could wish himself to somewhere he'd never been unless someone he knew was there. That was something to think about later, though. Faye jerked forward and thrust her chest out like something was pulling on it. That would have been weird enough if all the ex-gods, the angel holding Rosalie, and Rosalie herself weren't doing the same thing. The time crystal in his pocket strained against the material to break free as a demon dressed in gray from head to toe stepped out of the portal holding a knife. It had a gray rock in its hilt, just like the one the nice demon showed him. So the demon wasn't friendly after all. Is the demon trying to steal your time crystals? Is that why you're all leaning forward like that? Rand slapped a hand over his pocket to keep the time crystal from escaping. Well, not everyone was affected. Rand didn't feel any different, and his uncle didn't lean forward, but they probably didn't have time crystals inside them. Why did the ex-gods have them? That seemed like a strange place to keep a crystal. 2 angels flickered into view, and they clutched their chests and each other. The angel on the left Rand recognized as his guardian angel, Isaiah, and that angel glared at him like this was all his fault. It kind of was, much as Rand hated to admit it. If he and Uncle Mirren hadn't come here, then their angels wouldn't be affected by the demon's knife and the spells on it. Isaiah's glowing violet eyes made that quite clear as he glowered at him. Either his lighter-skinned angelic companion had shiny skin that reflected the glow of Isaiah's eyes, or his guardian angel glowed a lot brighter when vexed. It was probably the latter explanation. Isaiah had some magic too, but he would never say what it was, no matter how many times Rand summoned him and asked. Isaiah really shouldn't get his white robes in a tangle. I didn't know that the demons would show up here. Iluriel, Uncle Mirren's guardian angel, was a powerful mage. Rand found out about that when he was just a kid. Since he wasn't supposed to know, he didn't bother sharing that information with the ex-gods. Uncle Mirren knew too, and he stayed quiet about that as well, confirming that Rand made the right decision. Hey, Iluriel, can you do something to stop that demon? I know you're not supposed to get involved in human affairs. In case you haven't noticed, this isn't a human affair. This is demons and magic crystals and ex-gods, and even you can agree that this isn't a normal situation. Rand waved to get the angel mage's attention. Iluriel could be aloof sometimes, but he reluctantly got involved in more conflicts with demons than Rand wanted to count right now. So he stood a good chance of convincing that angel. The same couldn't be said for Isaiah, but Rand had threatened to report him to his aunt on multiple occasions just to get the angel to appear and do what he wanted, so he could understand why Isaiah blamed him for this. It must look to the angel like he engineered this. this to force them to appear and get involved, but that just wasn't true. Now, it wasn't the right time to point that out, so Rand settled for a pleading look, but the whole widening of the eyes and quivering of the lips thing worked better when he was 4 years old. I could make my eyes tear if that would help. Isaiah narrowed his luminous eyes like he knew what Rand was doing as he held Eloriel up. The angel mage flickered alarmingly, like he couldn't remain visible, and his violet eyes fluttered as their glow winked on and off. Maybe he couldn't help after all.
Clearly he can't help right now. Why don't you do something? You're young and magical, and I'm the only reason you still have a future. Unless you want that to change, you better stop him from taking our time crystals.
Now Faye glared at him too. Why was everyone ganging up on him?
Could you do something? You've done a lot of wishing over the last few days.
Uncle Mirren asked, but he looked at Rand with worried eyes. Did he think that earlier wish taxed him? He probably did. I might not have explained that Rosalie's magic is actually doing the work from that wish. Rand squeezed his uncle's shoulder. I'm fine. Really, I am. But that concern made his heart fill with warmth and love for his dear uncle.
Well then, get on with it. Our flesh is tougher than yours, but it can still tear and our ribs can break. Once that happens, those crystals will shoot out of us, and I don't think you want to witness that. It won't be pretty.
Faye said as she conjured another fireball. Who did she plan to throw it at? Rand let go of his uncle and squeezed the rock in his hand. In that case, I wish you and your knife would just go away. He repeated his wish twice more in his mind. After he charged the rock with his wish, he threw it at the demon holding the knife. As the rock flew toward the portal, the demon and his knife vanished. Everybody relaxed, and the time crystal stopped trying to break out of his pocket. That was good, because a crystal shouldn't do things like that unless Papa was around.
Are they gone?
Asked a familiar voice from inside the portal. It couldn't be the same demon that gave him the time crystal, but it sure sounded like him. We've got to stop meeting like this. Rand shook his head at the coincidence as he strode over to where the rock landed. He picked it up and reabsorbed the magic left over from his wish before sliding it back into his pocket for the next time. Lumer crystals were awesome like that. Not only could they hold magic, but they could anchor spells, and once used, you could easily remove the magic and put a different spell in it. They were as close to zero waste as one could get when it came to spellcraft, and Rand loved that. Thanks, Dad, for introducing me to them.
Look, I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know where they'd send me next,
the demon said from inside the portal, and he was definitely the same one from earlier who was creating these portals. Rand didn't blame him. He'd have stayed inside the portal too, just to avoid one of Faye's fireballs. Another one floated above her hand, waiting for a target because she had no one to throw it at yet.
No one, you know. I've already said too much, and I need to return. Will you take this time crystal and hide it like you did the other one, so the adversary can't get it?
The demon extended a hand through the portal, and a walnut-sized gray lumer crystal sat on his palm like an offering. Faye didn't throw the fireball, but she glowered as she crushed it, and smoke curled up from her hand. At least she was listening, perhaps. She now believed this demon was friendly. Sure, I can do that favor for you, if you'll do a small favor for me. Rand glanced at Rosalie. She lay as still and as stiff as a corpse, but she was a fighter, and the wound was a little smaller than the last time he looked at it, so she was still alive, just comatose, while she healed.
What do you want in exchange for this crystal?
The demon poked his hooded head out, but his veil still covered everything except his eyes, and they were a clash of pinks and blues like a sky at sunset after a storm. Can you help my friend? If you can change your shape to look like anyone, can you change somebody else's body to fix their wounds? Rand hoped for a yes, and he crossed his fingers behind his back. Hoping was a lesser form of wishing, and sometimes, even if he put no magic toward it, he could nudge things along in the right direction. But that only worked if what he hoped for was possible, and the people involved were already inclined to do the thing he hoped for.
Oh, you mean healing? Yeah, I can share my shape-shifting ability with someone to do that, but it might hurt. That's an unfortunate byproduct of the sharing. Who needs healing?
The demon glanced at them, and Rand finally remembered what the demon called his kind, versati. Rand glanced at the spot where Isaiah and Eloriel stood during the time crystal stealing knife incident, but they must have vanished when the knife-wielding demon did. They were still around somewhere, watching, but they were invisible, and they'd probably stay that way on principle to make up for those few minutes where they were visible. Oh well, I found a better option than pestering them for a miracle. But I would have done that if the demon wasn't so amenable. Rosalie's too young and ornery to die, and I'm not explaining her death to her mom. No way! Robin of Larkspur would make mincemeat out of anyone who harmed a hair on her daughter's head the instant she found out about it. He didn't believe she was dead. Yes, Rosalie believed it, but her mom was too tough to die. He doubted doubted there were any illnesses brave enough to infect her, Robin of Larkspur was the fiercest and most determined person Rand had ever met, and Rosalie was turning into a woman just like her. She needs healing, and so does she, Rand gestured to Rosalie, and he was surprised the standoffish angel still sat there, holding his injured friend like she might disappear if she let go. Maybe she wasn't a guardian angel, but she sure was possessive. Rand waved to Istiana next. Faye cradled her sister. Unlike Rosalie, Istiana was aware of everything happening around her.
I can help them both. If you promise you won't disappear me or destroy me when I leave this portal. Do you promise?
The demon asked, but he looked right at Faye since she was the most likely to throw fireballs at him. Rand glanced at everyone until they nodded, accepting the bargain. Yes, I can guarantee no one will harm you.
Who needs help the most urgently? I should start with her first.
The Versati strode out of the portal, and his long gray robes billowed in the chilly breeze. Rosalie needs help first. Rand accompanied the demon to his friend's side, then backed away so he could watch the ex-gods and make sure they kept their promise. They were easier to look at since they didn't remind him of his father's long-dead friend. Shade used to dress similarly, but they weren't a demon. Shade had something else going on, but Rand never found out what, and now he couldn't ask because Papa was on another timeline where he couldn't talk to him. Even if I could talk to him, there's no guarantee that Papa would tell me what happened to Shade. Uncle Mirren might know, but he might not because he was only a teenager then, and Papa liked to keep secrets from everyone, even if there was no logical reason to.
I've done all I can. She should wake up soon. I just don't know when. Where's the other woman who needs help?
The Versati rose from where he knelt a moment before and glanced around. Istiana waved a nearly transparent hand, warding off the Versati.
I don't think you can help me. This is no mortal wound, but thank you for the offer.
I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you find a remedy.
The Versati bowed to her, then held up the grey time crystal.
So, who'll take this thing and hide it for me? I did my part, now it's your turn.
Toss it to me. I'll hide it. I'm really good at hiding things. Just ask my uncle. Rand extended his hands to catch it.
Actually, you'd better give it to me. I've got an idea, and it might save my sister's life.
Faye waved to get the Versati's attention. What will you do with it? Rand had a feeling he would regret asking that, but curiosity demanded he find out. What could an X-time god do with it? She already said she protected the future. Could that crystal help stop the demons from taking over the future? Rand hoped so. It would be nice to return to Mount Eredrin and find it free of demons with all the damage repaired, so he didn't need to explain why there was a giant hole in the middle of the library. That would be ideal, actually.
You'll see.
Faye winked a glowing red eye, and it looked like there was an inferno where her eyes should be. That creep ran out so much he backed away from her. But Faye didn't notice because she squeezed her sister and spoke only to her now. Everyone else might as well have disappeared for all the notice she paid them.
Sorry, sis, this will hurt, but I think it'll help in the end.
What are you planning?
Istiana met that fiery gaze with an icy one of her own.
I'm gonna find out if your time magic comes from the specific time crystal inside you, or if it comes from some other part that is intrinsic to you. If it's the time crystal, then if I swap it out for this one, you should stop fading. And that should buy us some time to fix things.
Faye extended her hand to the Versati.
Will you give it to me?
The Versati looked at Rand, and he shrugged. I already have one. I don't need another. In fact, Rand didn't want the one he had, but he kept it in his pocket anyway, in case he needed it to get home. No one answered any questions about where they were, and that sent fear skittering through his veins, because the reason they kept quiet might be because he and his uncle weren't in their correct time. The signs were all around him, even covered in snow. The enchanted trees standing at the edge of the clearing didn't look dead or dying. The trees nearest him were green and thriving, despite the snow covering their friends. That was weird. Why was there no snow in a 100-foot circle around the X-gods? But outside that area, snow piled up knee-high in places. Rand shut down all thoughts about where or when they might be. He didn't want to know if they were in the past. That was information he could live without right now because it would just make him worry about somehow running into his father or a younger version of himself, and that just gave him the heebie-jeebies. The Versati tossed the time crystal to Faye, and she caught it one-handed like the thing was always meant for her. Maybe it was. She was a goddess after all.
Better go.
The Versati hurried back to the portal, and as soon as he crossed its brilliant threshold, it vanished.
But that won't save the timeline. The past needs a goddess. If not me, then who?
Istiana asked, like nothing happened. Maybe demons and portals winked out all the time where she lived.
Well, you have kids, so I volunteer the one who caused you to fade to take your place. And don't say it, it'll still balance because there will still be 2 women and 2 men as time gods.
Faye clenched her fist around the time crystal. Jannar cleared his throat and folded his arms.
And what about me? Am I just chopped liver?
You bear a striking resemblance to it.
Faye teased, and she smiled to make it clear she was joking, but her smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. weird.
Where is he, anyway?
Istiana glanced around. Where is who? Ran asked because he just couldn't leave well enough alone. He regretted asking the instant Istiana glanced at him, her eyes dimmed to soft gray like a cloudy sky as she said the one name he should have guessed.
My son, Ivarian. I saw him, then I didn't, and now I don't know where he is.
Rand's mouth dropped open, and maybe the ground shook or something, because he needed to sit. Ivarian was the son of a goddess? What did that make him? Rand sat on the ground between the portal and Rosalie and rocked as he tried to make sense of what he just heard. How could Ivarian be a demigod?
Chapter 8, Drama on Deck. Daniel watched the souls run down the ramp thing onto the beach, like they couldn't get away fast enough. But their guardian angels lingered instead of accompanying their charges to their final reward, thus ending their assignments. Some glanced at their charges' retreating backs with regret in their violet eyes. Some watched her pace the deck, impatient to leave. She could guess why they remained. Not all guardian angels were also warrior angels, but many were, and the angels stayed on board because they felt a battle looming on the horizon, electrifying the air. Daniel shivered in anticipation, and she wasn't the only one. The remaining guardian angels craved a fight against evil just as much as she did, and by God, they'd get one as soon as this tub got underway. Is the last soul off the boat? Daniel asked as she passed Azrael for a fifth time. He stood, arms crossed, beside the top of the ramp like he was guarding it. At her question, he turned and cast his glowing eyes over the deck.
Yes, that was the last soul. Help me raise the ramp.
Azariah hustled past her and bent to grab the plank-looking thing and slide it back into the groove that stored it somewhere below this deck. Sure, she might as well work for that fight. Daniel bent to grab the other end, but Azrael slammed his big, sandal-clad foot down on the corner.
You're not going anywhere.
Azrael stomped onto the top of the ramp and glared at everyone. Now what got his robes all twisted up?
Like hell, I'm not. Get out of the way.
Azariah tried to budge the ramp, but Azrael glowed brighter as he swelled up and took on mass, just to become too heavy to budge.
Stop and think. You're a smart angel, and the whole thing is wrong.
Are you calling me a liar? Daniel shot up from her crouch and would have gotten in his face if Azrael hadn't added 2 feet to his height. She settled for glaring up at him.
Will you calm down? I know you're not lying. You're telling me the truth as you know it, but there's more to this than you know.
Azrael rested an oversized hand on her shoulder and pushed her back a few steps. Well, how do you know that? Last I checked, you weren't there when the Adversary started messing around with time crystals in the gray between. Faniel slid out from under his hand, and her sword appeared, sheathed at her hip. She wouldn't draw it, not on a fellow angel, but its presence cooled her anger a little and sharpened her mind.
Look, something weird is going on. Can we all agree on that, right?
Azrael met every angel's eyes on the deck. What was his problem? Faniel nodded despite herself, because Az was right. This whole situation was weird.
Good. Then you'll agree that we need to stay here and figure it out.
Azrael raised his hand. When Thaniel protested, that jerk cast a silence spell on her, so her protest cut off. That was so unfair. She seethed under the silence spell, but she couldn't say anything until he lifted it.
Right now, heaven needs all the protection it can get.
Azrael glanced at everyone again, but this time he didn't move on until everyone either dropped his gaze or nodded. When he glanced at her, Thaniel glared back, unimpressed. He waved a hand, releasing her, but Azariah beat her to it.
No, we need to go to the Gray Between, save Arginil, and stop whatever the Adversary plans to do with those time crystals.
Azariah rose from his crouch since he couldn't retract the ramp until Azrael allowed it. He plans to destroy all of time everywhere all at once, so we need to go now because time's in way more danger than this place is. Thaniel stroked her sword hilt. She longed to draw it, but fighting wasn't allowed in heaven, so she clasped her hands in front of her and her sword vanished.
Don't you see? If the Adversary is in the Gray Between, then we can't leave. Heaven needs all the defenders it can get, because he won't stay over there. The minute he's done with what he's doing in the Gray Between, he'll come here.
Azrael turned and swept his hand across the sun-drenched beach and the purple spires rising into the clear blue sky in the distance. Songs mixed with prayers on the gentle breeze tugging on her hair, and that firmed her resolve. Thaniel stepped forward. Will heaven even exist if he destroys time? Will anything be left at all? control. That was the one piece of this that made no sense to her. But the adversary must think something would remain, or why would he break time at all? There must be an easier way to get what he wanted.
Of course it will. Heaven stands outside of time, beyond the circles of the world. That's what I've been trying to tell you. If he destroys time, then heaven and hell will be the only places left. Where do you think he'll go then? Not back to hell, that's for sure.
Azrael didn't look at her as he replied. He kept his gaze on the guardian angels still aboard. Was he trying to guilt them into disembarking? He raised some troubling points, but she didn't want to admit it because that meant leaving her friends to suffer and possibly cease to exist at the hands of the enemy. What if, Az is right, what if collecting time crystals and destroying time was just a distraction? Daniel stared at the purple spires in the distance. Could she risk it? The other guardian angels must be thinking the same thing because they crossed the deck to the ramp in an orderly line. Azrael shrank down to his normal height and clasped each guardian angel's hand before letting them descend the ramp to rejoin their charges on the beach. Was that his plan all along, to get the guardian angels to go with their mortals into heaven so it would have more protectors? Did heaven really need more protectors? Weren't there lots of angels in heaven right now? Out of all the classes of angels, weren't the warrior angels still the largest group? Something else was going on here. What did Azrael know? She wouldn't find out unless she asked, so she might as well do that now, since the last guardian angel just stepped off the ramp. What's really going on?
How did the adversary escape from hell?
Azrael hopped off the ramp onto the deck. Was he coming with them? The same way I did. He went through a gateway some idiot built between hell and the gray between. He just waltzed through it like it was built just for him. And it probably was by one of his minions, because no one else would be that stupid. Danielle crouched to help Azariah retract the ramp, but she couldn't catch his eyes, and he kept his head bowed. What did he think about all this?
Who built the gateway?
Azrael leaned against the railing that wrapped around the deck instead of helping. I don't know. She never thought to ask that. It was there when I arrived. I figured one of his flunkies built it. Daniel slid the ramp into the slot. It was a lot easier to move it without Azrael standing on it.
Think about it. Who has that kind of power?
Azrael still wasn't done being the drama. I have thought about it, and I still don't know. Do you? Because he was acting like he knew something about it. Daniel shoved the last bit of the ramp harder than necessary. I wish he'd just tell me what he knows, but that's not dramatic enough for him. She rolled her eyes.
Who could have built it? A gateway is a magical tunnel that burrows through all the realms in between where you are and where you want to go. That's a significant amount of magic one would need to build something like that, and only a few could command such power, let alone control it without it destroying them.
Azrael examined his nails. Maybe it was one of the X-gods. There's a bunch of them running around in hell and they all have some magic. Danielle rose, but that solution didn't sit well with her. If the X-gods could build a gateway, why did they wait thousands of years to do it?
No, it couldn't be one of them. Their powers were limited after they lost the war and were sent to hell.
Azrael rubbed an invisible speck on his manicured nails. Then who built it? And why is this important now? Daniel folded her arms. Why was she the only one asking questions? Azariah wasn't a shy angel, but she did shock him when she told him about Argeniel. Maybe he worried about what would happen when they met again after so long apart. Well, he shouldn't worry. Argeniel is still bookish and prone to brooding, so nothing really changed there.
Think about it. Who is that powerful?
Azrael let his hands fall back to his sides as he let that sink in. No, it can't be. Daniel staggered to the railing and slid down it to sit on the deck as shock washed over her. But now that she thought about it, there was only one answer, and she didn't like it.
Now you see the problem. One of us created that gateway, specifically an angel mage. No one else would be powerful enough to do that and maintain it for any length of time.
Azrael patted her on the head like she was an exceptionally bright student. Danielle glared up at him, and he removed his hand. Hold on now. I may not have seen Argeniel in thousands of years, but I know him. He didn't create that gateway. Danielle shot to her feet as doubts assailed her. When she met him again after all that time, he was under glamour and convinced that he'd fallen from grace. The gateway already existed when she broke the glamour and the news that he was not in fact fallen. What did you do, Argeniel, before I arrived? She turned and stared at the sea lapping at the shore, but she found no comfort there.
He didn't build it, and right now he needs help. That's all I need to know. So let's go.
Azariah caught her hands and pulled her away from the rail.
Come on, you said you'd help me.
Until we know for sure what he did or didn't do, you can't bring him here.
Azrael said like he was talking about the weather, not someone they grew up with.
What are you saying? He didn't do this. this, and he didn't fall, so he belongs here in heaven.
Azariah swung around and shook his fist at Azrael.
Not until you can clear his name.
Azrael shrugged like it didn't matter to him, but it did, or he wouldn't have brought it up.
He didn't create that gateway. I won't believe anything else. Are you going to help me or what?
Azariah tugged her hand. Yeah, because friendship trumps everything else. Daniel wouldn't fail her friends. She could sort out whatever Arjanil did or didn't do later, after they dealt with the adversary. Tell me what to do, and try not to use nautical terms, because I don't know what any of them mean.
Okay, you can start by bargaining with a dragon since the wind is blowing the wrong way to use the sails.
Azariah grinned at her when she groaned. Why did he have to pick that one job for her? After her last run-in with a dragon, she doubted any would talk to her. But Daniel squared her shoulders and walked to the seaward side of the deck and froze when a shape appeared in the distance. Is there another ship scheduled to sail from the gray between today?
No. Why do you ask?
Then what's that on the horizon? Daniel pointed at the boat-shaped silhouette on the horizon.
I don't know. I'm the only one sailing today.
Azariah shook his head as he stopped at the rail beside her to stare at it.
Is there another ship at the harbor in the gray between capable of sailing?
Azrael joined them.
There might be, but who's sailing it?
Azariah shook his head as this new shock sank in and hopefully unseated the previous thing that shocked him. We should find out, and she was tired of standing around waiting. Daniel grasped the railing and would have jumped overboard, but Azrael shoved her back.
Allow me, since I detained you.
Azrael extended his wings and flapped them until he lifted off the deck. What about the rules? Heaven is a no-fly zone for us, Daniel shouted. And she might have smiled too, because she seldom got to remind a senior angel of mundane things like rules. Azrael didn't reply as Azariah bustled around on deck, hauling ropes and doing other mysterious things required to cast off. Neither did Azrael fly all that high before a dragon with pink scales rose out of the sea and planted herself in front of him. Daniel sighed. Poor Azrael. The rules apply to drama queens like you too. Such a pity. She leaned against the railing and enjoyed listening to his protestations and reasons why the rules really shouldn't apply to him. Sorry, bub. You're not special. The rules apply to all angels. You've been listening to Storm the Gates, Book 3 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the next part publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.